And welcome, and thanks for joining us on the 2025 Cloud Exchange on Federal News Network. Thanks very much for being here. And our guest for this section is Rob Vietmeyer. He's the Chief Software Officer for the Defense Department. And we're going to cover a lot of ground, not just on cloud, but all of the modernization activities that are required to get workloads into the cloud and then what you do with them once they're there. And there's a lot of ground to cover there. Rob, thanks very much for doing this. Appreciate your time. And let's start at a very high level on cloud itself, and all the modernization work that's really been going on for years throughout the Defense Department, but that also kind of dovetails with some of the new administration's priorities. I think it's fair to say. Talk
Yeah.
us through big picture where the department is in terms of migrating those workloads to hybrid, to commercial CSPs. We'll start there, and then maybe we can get in a little bit to what some of the contracting for some of that down the road looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for this opportunity to discuss some of these really transformational changes that are underway in the department right now. We are moving fast to try to keep pace with where the SecDef is driving us. And as he stated, software-defined warfare is not a future construct, right? It's really a reality we find ourselves in today. And as we're looking to our ability to rapidly deploy our new systems, secure software capabilities into the cloud environment to really maintain our strategic advantage and increase the deterrence to war, what we're finding is like we have these outdated processes. We need to adapt to the realities of cloud computing, adapt to agile and collaborative, secure approaches as we're moving forward. So DevSecOps, how do we really transform our relationship with the defense industrial base, with our key providers? And so we are moving as fast as we can to keep up. And I think, as you mentioned, cloud is absolutely the core foundation for us, right? That becomes the modern foundation, and we're seeing a lot of success with JWCC. So after the years of effort that have gone into trying to consolidate the department's approach and optimize the department's approach to cloud, I think we're finally really realizing that vision. So JWCC continues to increase. We are working very closely with MilDeps on how do we optimize that cloud contract and those constructs for very large workloads that they're beginning to migrate on into that environment today. We are working with the vendor community behind JWCC on how do we continue to optimize the capabilities they're delivering to the department in a whole bunch of really interesting ways. So that contract's not static; that continues to evolve, and we're already talking with both industry and with our counterparts across the department about how do we continue to optimize, how do we look at the next generation of cloud contracts for the department and start to form out some of the ideas of where we want to take this cloud capability as we move forward in the department.
Just to pull on that JWCC thread a little
Yeah.
bit more and what that really meant, I think it's difficult to overstate how significant that was for the department to have one central destination where at least workloads could go. Give us some
Yeah.
sense of how much that has actually made a difference over the past few years since you've had that contract in place, and how has it been different from the MilDep centric cloud approaches that had been going on and still exist up until this point.
Yeah, yeah. And listen, I've been around the cloud journey in the department as long as cloud has been a thing here. So I know where all the skeletons are buried. But I tell you, when I started, there were thousands and thousands of cloud contracts. We couldn't track them. Everyone was acquiring cloud through their own means and mechanisms. We weren't able to optimize either our purchasing power or that cloud journey. So looking at how do you go from our legacy systems into this cloud environment, that remains one of these challenge points, right? That takes a skill set You don't want to just lift and shift your legacy systems. So we need to be able to have folks that can optimize those legacy systems, bring them into the cloud environment, and be able to maintain them uh, over time. So when you look at the cloud environment, there's this. It's not the push button silver bullet to everyone's problems, right? There's this cloud responsibility model where the cloud vendors are responsible for delivering the cloud infrastructure, delivering the services they're responsible for, but the customer remains responsible for delivering, securing, and maintaining the customer's data and applications that sit within that cloud environment. And I think what we're finding now is with JWCC, we are taking many of those, what I'll say, startup challenges off the table, right? So establishing contracts, establishing mechanisms, understanding the security of the cloud that you're acquiring. That's all taken care of within JWCC. So you have at least um, a part of that infrastructure, you're part of your journey here taken care of for you in a very streamlined way. So now you can focus on that more difficult. How do I optimize my existing systems and data to fit within the cloud environment, and then how do I effectively operate? And so this is not just hey, turn everything over to DISA, transition from the services. The mill depths and the Fourth Estate folks are key partners in making this happen. We couldn't do it without them. They're making those investments right now to be able to migrate their workloads, to optimize them for the cloud, to be able to secure and maintain those in the cloud. So this is really a team sport between all the players in the department and our industrial based partners, both in the cloud and other spaces, as we make this journey.
And as we've talked to you and other senior leaders in the CIO's office over the years, a couple of the big things that we've been told that JWCC provided that wasn't really as easily accessible, at least not centralized within the same contract, were OCONUS capabilities and
Yep.
classified capabilities. Talk us through a bit the extent to which that's mattered and how much of that has really come into the mission space from JWCC since you've had this in place.
Yeah, we've had, with some of the vendors, we started with, they had the full range of both classified and unclassified capabilities. We're now at the point where all four vendors have both classified and unclassified capabilities there. So that's been a bit of a roadmap bringing everyone along to get to, classified capabilities. Those are in place now. A good point that you're bringing up right now. How do we extend that cloud into our operational and tactical edge environments? And there are efforts underway right now with DISA and also within the mill depths on how do we extend those infrastructures. So we have initial capabilities there, but I think as we move forward into the future, you'll see those become more robust. As the focus for those edge environments has really been in the secret classified environment. And in those spaces, the department takes on more responsibility for at least providing some of the overseas hosting, power, bandwidth kind of capabilities. And so that really takes both DoD investment as well as the vendor investment to fully realize those capabilities. So we continue to work with the cloud vendors. They are providing very interesting both network capabilities, computing infrastructure, advanced services, all the way up to AI and machine learning types of capabilities. We are fully involved with them now, and how do we take those great capabilities that are oftentimes here located in the continental United States, and making sure that we're delivering those effectively out to the edge in the battle space. So that's a really interesting journey, and that will continue. We're in the early phases of that, and that we expect that to continue to expand as we move forward.
Yeah, and that gets directly back to I think what you were talking about earlier with the cloud responsibility model. It sounds like that
Right.
model looks a little bit different, CONUS versus OCONUS, but it also sounds like the contracting construct that you're working within at least gave those vendors the flexibility to innovate in that space and figure out exactly how to provide those OCONUS and classified services in a slightly different responsibility model. Is that fair?
Yeah. So when we go overseas, we start to worry about data sovereignty and the various legal frameworks and our ability to protect our data as it operates. So, and especially when we look at the unique requirements for hosting classified compute. And so, when we go into overseas locations, our focus really is in providing um, DoD floor space to host those environments that are under U.S. legal jurisdiction. And us providing the networking and some of the cryptographic controls for protecting those workloads. So there's a greater responsibility for between us and the vendors, shared responsibility as we look into that classified OCONUS types of capabilities. We continue to have those discussions with the vendors where they can pick up more of that requirement. So things like commercial or classified services for commercial CFSC and other things are like opening up um, additional opportunities for the cloud vendors to take and provide more of those core capabilities as cloud infrastructure that we acquire. And then part of the challenge becomes us that supply and demand, right? So
Hmm.
the cloud infrastructure is expensive, and so you try to build just and deploy just enough based on current demand and demand projections. And so, working with the MilDeps and the DoD components about what makes sense, what do they need, what are their priorities overseas. So those conversations and channels are happening now. We are having the conversation around both traditional cloud infrastructure as well as the need for AI and GPU types of compute in OCONUS locations, and then making sure that we have the delivery pipelines with our vendors that can build out rapidly those capabilities as demand continues to increase.
Perfect transition into the direction I wanted to go next, which is what's next after JWCC. I mean, the department's been very clear from the beginning that this contracting approach and this structure is not forever, and there will be follow-ons. So obviously,
Yeah.
you don't want to get too far ahead of the procurement process here for whatever that looks like. But based on everything that you've told us so far, I mean, what have you learned about what's great about JWCC, what it doesn't have, what the follow on needs to have, and how things might look different in the future?
Yeah. I think there's some, general areas, and we're not at a release in procurement now. We're still having the conversations with our partners on what makes sense, what are they looking for. So I can, talk to some of the challenge points. You hit on one, which was the OCONUS cloud capability. So we expect to have increase those capabilities moving forward from a standard contractual perspective. We're looking at how do we optimize the vehicle for some of these large purchases that the MilDeps want to make. Originally, JWCC was envisioned sort of as everyone comes and puts their own task order on into the vehicle, and that has made some of the task order management overhead. We have worked with the Army and working with the Air Force now to how we optimize for larger purchases, larger task orders that come on, making sure that the mechanisms are there to do it. Uh, Congrats to the DISA team for working with the Army to meet some of the Army's needs and overcome some of those challenges in the current vehicle. Um, so we see just from a contract execution, there's room for us to improve how we're managing and executing task orders, making sure that we're able to get all of the efficiencies that we're hoping to achieve by consolidating the contract. Um, from a technical perspective, we are looking to how we increase visibility into our workloads. So things like FinOps and other mechanisms, and potentially more robust security controls and tighter integrations with the our defensive cyber teams within the next contract vehicle. We're looking at things like how do we expand on the cloud marketplaces, which has been a challenge. So if you look at JWCC, primarily that was envisioned to buy the services that the CSPs are responsible for providing and selling. Now, within each of those cloud ecosystems, there are other third-party vendors that make their capabilities available within the cloud marketplaces. And we found that the JWCC vehicle was sort of suboptimal to getting access to those. So we're working through with the DISA team right now. How do we make that easier for folks to get access to third-party capabilities that are available within that cloud marketplace? I expect that work to move on. And so, if we look at where we're going to go, I think it's part of this modernization journey. How do we make sure that we can get faster onboarding? How do we streamline authorities to operate, the security accreditations and controls? How do we bring in more automation, tighter integration with some of the DoD software factories and our CI/CD DevSecOps pipelines, so that we can go from very rapidly from concept to deployment, global deployment, very quickly, and using that cloud as part of that core infrastructure for how do we just drive this modernization vision that the SecDef is pushing us to move to very quickly.
And again, I want to be sensitive to the fact that literally everything we're talking about here is about future decisions. So none of this is set in stone yet. But the department has talked about a greater number of vendors participating in whatever the follow-on
Yep.
is going to be. Is that likely to be mostly in that marketplace space that you were just talking about, with the large hyperscale providers really needing to be that large to serve that CSP function, or might we see more participation in the CSP role as well?
Well, I think we're looking at, as we look at both the hyperscalers as sort of the core anchors of the cloud in both the commercial and DoD space. That marketplace is then extending into SaaS and other software providers, enabling those vendors to participate more seamlessly and optimize that participation. We're looking at how do we open it up to not just cloud providers, but the small businesses and others that can help in that refactoring of legacy systems, that cloud migration, or help in optimizing and managing and securing our workloads and data when they're in the cloud environment. Looking at where the commercial markets are going out right now with AI and machine learning types of capabilities. How do those all fit in? So I will say that we've to your point, we have not defined the contracting approach, but these are all factors that are leading into our consideration on how would we, whether it's one contract or multiple contracts, how do we approach this challenge moving forward? So we're having, looking at where we are now, where the mil deps and components are telling us they need to be in the near future, and then in the long-term future, and then making sure that that's lined up with how we want to approach it from a contractual and acquisition perspective.
All right, so let's talk. Let's get into the part of the discussion about what cloud really does for you, because we're not migrating to cloud just for cloud's sake. Let's talk about software development. Good time to talk about it with the DoD Chief Software Officer on with us. Overall approach to software development. Give us a sense for some of the steps the department's taking to modernize all of that and why cloud matters to it.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, so the SecDef has said, listen, we are in the era of software-defined warfare now. So software is so critical to our military capabilities. We can look at what's happening in Ukraine and the need for our weapon system. The software is defining the capabilities of our weapon systems, and our ability to rapidly evolve and adjust to battlefield conditions. It's absolutely amazing at the speed at which these things are evolving. So the approaches that we've used in the past for delivering software, delivering systems, need to update and respond to that reality that we're in now. I think I'll plug, we have recently published on the DoD CIO website the State of DevSecOps report that's highlighted our progress in modernizing our software approaches and implementing the DevSecOps approach, really looking at these software factories and recognizing that these become what's termed in that paper the digital arsenal for modern warfare. they're becoming really critical. And we're seeing that, DevSecOps, meaning we're integrating security into our development phases, integrating security into our operational phases, bringing those what has been siloed processes and capabilities all together. That is not just impacting the cybersecurity and our ability to achieve things like continuous authorization approaches. Um, it is also changing and modernizing our relationship with the defense industrial base and our system integrators. So we see the most successful programs are becoming more blended between the government and our defense and industrial base partners in terms of managing that capability moving forward. So we have the foundations in place. They tend to be what I'll call more the exceptions right now. There are people doing really advanced work. What we're attempting to do is make that, rather than a few exceptions, make that the default approach as we're moving forward in terms of our modernization journey here. And I think it aligns directly with the SecDef's memo on moving to the software acquisition pathway as a preferred approach um, for not just traditional IT systems, but for our business systems, for our warfighting systems, recognizing that the agility of both that acquisition approach and then the technology approach that we have with DevSecOps and software factories really enable the department to be much more responsive in the modern battlefield space that we need to be operating in. So it's really taking these commercial best practices. Now, that drives this huge sort of cultural transition that we've talked about, right? Moving from um, our traditional RMF risk management approaches and ATOs to moving to processes where we have real-time cyber posture awareness, building off of a platform-centric approach with, say, cloud computing, and then our software factory approaches on top of that, where our applications can inherit lots of the controls that are needed to get to approval to operate are just there, built in, provided by the cloud providers, provided by platform capabilities that the Defense Department or our industrial base is providing for us within those clouds. And then building in those additional controls through automation into the pipelines that we're using to develop and deliver capabilities moving forward in a process we refer to as continuous authority to operate. And I think we're taking, a lot of these exemplars right now. And when my boss, Ms. Arrington, talks about, blowing up RMF, what we're talking about is, how do we start to, take these examples of best practices of moving to this automation of these controls to greater inheritance, to be able to move faster, and change from a process where we're mainly compliance focused to now where we're really focused on what's our real-time cyber posture, and how do we become more responsive to emerging threats in that environment. I think it's really important to highlight that as we're realizing that we're in this era of software-defined warfare, so have our adversaries, and so they are increasingly, targeting our software supply chain, targeting our DevSecOps environments, targeting that software as an attack vector. And a lot of what you're seeing from the department in terms of this transformational change that we're trying to drive is how do we drive not just this modernization pieces like cloud and these other pieces, but how do we drive a culture of cyber with between ourselves, our suppliers, our defense industrial base, that's really necessary to move us forward, but move us forward in a way that we maintain our security and resilience against advanced persistent threats and other attacks that our adversaries are attempting to go after in increasing ways.
Want to talk about a lot of things that you just mentioned as we go on, but I do want to loop back to software factories because I think it's
Yeah.
it's such an interesting topic for the department. That DevSecOps report that you mentioned
Uh-huh.
highlights that there are now 50 of those factories throughout the
Yeah.
department, and I can remember a report just a few years ago that talked about the fact that there were 30, and that was possibly starting to get toward an unmanageable number. It doesn't sound like that's the thinking anymore.
We did I think, a disservice. And to be fair about what's really happening, a lot of people have, there's been some pushback to the term software factory. So some folks that are actually running software factories are like, don't put that label on me. It's got some overhead now. Um, and so the number of 50, yes, it's bigger than that. But I think that the we did a disservice by focusing on the number of factories. And the real question, the real fundamental question should be how many of our systems, whether those warfighting systems, our business systems, how or others, how many of those systems are implementing modern methods that can deliver in the rapid pace that's needed in today's environment? And I think if you start counting that number, right, if you start looking at how many of our systems are there in terms of implementing these modern practices, I think you'll find the number is relatively small compared to the overall number of systems. So I'm hoping over this year that I can change the discussion that we're having in the department from counting software factories to really looking at um, what's the impact on the mission, and what's the work, where do we need to be focused to improving our ability to operate and deliver these modern systems, right? To like really transform this, because I think that counting software factories is the wrong metric, and what's the right number, it takes you down a path. What we really need to be looking at is what's the mission need? Are we able to meet those mission needs? And if not, how do we expand and build out these capabilities so that we can have an increasing number of our systems more responsive, more modern, more secure as we move forward? And I think that's kind of the one of the key transition points that the department is now. We started this journey with a lot of advertising and hand waving about software factories, and now we have to focus on, now this is really what the mission needs. These are our priorities, and here's how we go after it, leveraging cloud, leveraging modern delivery practices, leveraging more modern cybersecurity practices as we move forward.
And I would guess that an eventual goal is to get to a place where everything that you just said is kind of institutionalized throughout the department. And instead of thinking of this as, oh, these software factories are these special places where they do
Yeah,
DevSecOps and they do
yeah,
modern software development practices.
yeah.
Is that the direction you want to get the department pointed to? And if that's feasible, how far down the road is something like that where you don't need a special place called a software factory?
Yeah, I think yeah, especially please call the software. I think when we say software factory, what we really mean is people doing cool stuff with software. Um, and what we're finding is there's a wide range of different software factory types, right? And so I think it's very, what we're doing today and what we have done in the recent years is very informative in terms of where does the department go next? And we see software factories, for example, that are the core to the weapon system, right? They are delivering the software updates that are driving, the capabilities of a F-22 or an F-35 or an Aegis cruiser, or the carrier task force, right? There are folks that have software factories that are literally delivering the warfighting capabilities into the hands of the folks at the edge. There are software factories that are focused on how do we train more software developers? How do we train people that might be needing to code software for drones sitting in a trench, right? That and how do we make sure that we have the skill sets from a software development, a software engineering perspective, deployed into our military units. So there's folks looking at just training up the workforce that's going to be needed for this modern environment. There are software factories that are focused on driving innovation from non-traditional partners, right? Like build out, portion of the weapon system that we can put into an unclassified environment, sit it in a commercial open space so that non-traditional people can come in, can demonstrate their software, demonstrate their capability to prove out that it works in a easily accessible way. And then if it proves to add value, then we take it from sort of this innovation, what I'll call an innovation factory. We can then take it over the fence into more protected zones if it's proving out that it's useful. So we can create. We see folks using these DevSecOps practices, these software factory practices, just to be innovation hubs to evaluate potential enhancements into a particular system or weapon platform. And then we have software factories that are providing some of the core tools and platforms that others need to develop cool software, right, on top of it. So you look at a lot of the work that the Air Force and Platform One team has been doing. They are supporting both system customers, but they are also supplying the core piece parts to others that are trying to build and do modern software within their own environment. So you start to see this sort of really interesting ecosystem evolving within the department and evolving with in conjunction with our defense industrial base partners that are really trying to build that foundation that's needed for the modern environment that we find ourselves in today.
Want to pivot to RMF as you brought up, and as you said, Ms. Arrington has used the term, we're going to blow up RMF. I want to get some sense for blowing up, what blowing up really means, because there has been that this observation has been around for years in the department, that just doing a single point in time ATO that lasts you for a couple years doesn't do much for you. It sounds like the thinking has evolved to the point now where it looks like you actually can't really change that without also changing RMF. Is that fair? And if so, give us some color around.
To be fair, right now, this is one of those other areas where the department's approach is still evolving on the specifics of this. So the DoD CISO, Mr. Dave McEwen, is hosting meetings with his counterparts. They're looking at coming up with recommendations. So you're going to get my opinion here on this, and realize that there will be more coming out from the department soon, on what this really looks like. I think so part of the confusion is when we say blow up RMF, it doesn't necessarily mean that the FISMA law or that the controls in 853 are broken. I think what we can say is that our implementation in the department today impedes innovation. It burdens our workforce. It's really difficult to scale. It's kind of this archaic, paper-driven, compliance-first type of approach that is it's a lot of overhead and slow to adapt to the modern environment, and where we now find ourselves in an environment where the adversary is continually attacking with advanced persistent threats, where we find that our ability just to respond to CVEs or common vulnerabilities and exploits, those are growing at an exponential rate. So I think last year is about 40,000 new CVEs came up, so a 38% increase from last year. So these are things in your systems that need to be patched, and if there's 40,000, if you're not in a highly dynamic real-time cyber posture environment that can respond to that level of speed of update and patching and response actions, you're going to fall behind, right? You're going to be vulnerable to your adversaries. And so when we look at where the focus has been on what I'll say, the problem being, in my opinion, the implementation being paper-driven, one-time sort of assessments, and sort of slow to pull in more modern approaches. I think that's what we want to blow up, right? It's really the implementation and how it works today. So if I were to look at, hey, what am I recommending as we move forward? So we've talked about parts of it, right? This platform-centric cybersecurity with inheritable controls, like the cloud, and we can build, application platforms on top of that. So parts of the DevSecOps pipeline that enable us to inherit a significant portion of the needed controls. And then we can either, in the case of cloud providers, we can have them, they're accountable for maintaining a lot of the controls. As we build DoD platforms, we can have dedicated platform teams that are responsible for the cyber posture of that platform. And then the applications that we're putting on top of that inherit all of that security, all of that secure operations automatically. I think the second piece is when we look at DevSecOps and software factories, the need to automate the RMF controls. So whether you call it continuous monitoring or automation, build those into the pipelines, build the approval processes into the pipeline itself, so that we take our cybersecurity RMF professionals, so your security control assessors and your information security managers, build those into the pipeline, so they are monitoring the cyber posture of the applications that are coming through. And we have these gateways that are built into the pipeline process that says, yes, this piece of software, this system has passed the appropriate security testing and controls, et cetera, so that when it ends at the pipeline, it's approved to deploy without additional paper-based, manual sort of assessment processes. So we can start to build, this through inheritance of these underlying platforms, build into, through automation, controls into our delivery pipelines, and then integrate into that our defensive cyber operations, right? So you start to break down these silos, so we can have these very rapid response actions. So if you start to see, the next Log4j or Log4Shell vulnerability pop up, that you can respond in hours or minutes and not in days, weeks, and months. Because we've broken down these silos. We know where these software components are. We know how to patch and deploy those patches very rapidly in ways that are atypical today.
Sticking with RMF for just another beat or two here. I love your distinction about this is mainly an issue with the department's implementation of RMF, because I think some of the grandfathers of RMF would point out, don't forget the M. It's up to you to manage it. Which kind of suggests a lot of this is about culture and habit. And so I guess my main question for you there is, as you're advising department leadership on what this successor to RMF or modified RMF should look like, how do you start to get after those cultural pieces and design a process that encourages people to do everything that you're suggesting here is goodness in the way that you design a process like this?
Yeah. Well, so I think we're seeing at least at the highest levels, some of those drivers happening from the SecDef and others saying, hey, this is how we need to move forward, and at least at a high level. And now us filling in the details. I think we can look at many of the programs that are operating through these principles today, and then figure out how we need to move forward. I think the difficult piece of this is, like you said, we have talked about in our cybersecurity frameworks, continuous monitoring and other improvements needed to RMF for a long time. That has been hard, right, for people to adopt. I think that one, we can build out through cloud and software factories, we can build out these reusable foundations now that make it a whole lot easier. In the past, we tried to say every program, you need to go figure this out for yourself. If we can come in now and say, hey, we can provide you an existing platform that takes care of 75% of the RMF controls are built in. They're a common control provider. You just inherit all of that goodness. You only have to worry about this gap. We can make it a whole lot easier for folks to implement. I think also we're seeing significant advancements in the cybersecurity tooling, the use of AI in this space, um, the use of real-time cyber posture awareness types of capabilities, implementation of zero trust controls, and the progress we're making there. All of this plays together to really raise the bar and make this uh, more of a reality than I think we've tried in the past. That the technology and our understanding of what's needed and how to do it is much more advanced than, say, if we were looking at this problem, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and we're trying to figure out how do we take, our thousands of systems and get each one of them to build these enhancements. That's almost an impossible challenge. I think we're at a position now where we can provide a lot of the underlying capabilities as inheritable inheritable controls, inheritable platforms that can really, as folks migrate into those environments, can really move forward much faster.
Something I failed to mention on the RMF topic is
Yeah.
the department has really gone out to industry in a big way to get feedback on proposed ways ahead
Yep.
here. And I think to the department's great credit. And you all have done the same thing with something called the Software Fast Track Initiative. I think you got
Yeah.
400 comments on that. For people who aren't tracking on that, could you just give us a quick intro into what SWIFT is the acronym now? What are
Yes.
some of the overall objectives there?
Yeah, and so all of these play together, and I think that as we're looking through, as you mentioned, the Swift RFIs, um, I am about three-quarters of the way through those. So we've received over 400 of those responses to the RFI. So, so the software fast track was looking at this challenge of the software supply chain, and we're relying upon a lot of third-party providers for software in the department, and we're looking at the adversaries, as I mentioned, going after uh, those pipelines, going after that supply chain, and we're looking at, hey, how do we work with these suppliers, with our defense industrial base, to really raise this culture of cyber awareness as we move forward. So Swift is our attempt to try to say, here is how we want to set a standard for software in the department from a cybersecurity and supply chain perspective, and then um, for industry partners that can meet those controls either through AI assessments or through independent assessments, then you're on a fast track to deployment in the department, because we'll know we have we understand the posture and the security environment of that, the trustworthiness of that piece of software, and so it makes it a whole lot easier for us to embed that more rapidly if industry can demonstrate their ability to meet some of these controls. I would say the responses to the RFI have been phenomenal, both indicating um, existing capabilities that folks have in place today, where they're saying, hey, we're already doing this. We're controlling our software pipeline. We're securing it in very advanced ways. Or from tool vendors or service providers that say, hey, listen, we have the tools and the infrastructure that can make this a whole lot easier for folks to get going. This is not something that everybody's going to have to figure out for themselves. These are their existing capabilities um, that are in place today. And so part of the reason it's, I'm three-quarters of the way through over 2 weeks, but I'm just really impressed with the responses that industry has given us. They really took it to heart, understood the problems that we're trying to get after, and have been really positive in saying, hey, we're there. This is what we've learned. Here's some of the challenges. Here's where we're going. Or, hey, we have tools that are available that can do these parts of this problem. A lot of great advice that's coming through there. So I think from my personal perspective, from a software, what I've the insights I'm getting from the RFIs, the use of SBOMs or software bill of materials across industry has really grown. I think every response that I have read so far has talked about how they're using SBOMs or how they have tooling to support the generation, the creation of SBOMs, or to help illuminate existing SBOMs with cybersecurity information, so you have a better picture of your software. And I think that a lot of on top of SBOMs, the folks that are implementing very advanced supply chain security controls, software supply chain security controls, has also been really interesting. So things that are there's a standard called SLSA, SLSA, that actually came out of Google, is what Google uses for its software supply chain security. SLSA was mentioned as a standard by at least a half of the responses, somewhere in there. So it's interesting to see people saying, not only do we understand software security, we're adapting and implementing these industry best practices, whether that's SLSA or OWASP or some of these other commercial frameworks for software security. Those are being implemented, and at least from the responders that we're looking at, that they're pretty prevalent. The folks that understand these challenges and are implementing the controls needed to get after that, or providing the tooling to help others implement those controls. So I think it's really fascinating now, and of course this ties closely to the RMF discussion that we were just having. And so we're really looking at overall, how do we raise the cyber posture with our suppliers, internally, with our defense industrial base, and I'm really looking forward to the next step. So I have a few more, a couple more weeks to get through those RFIs, work internally with our process. We are engaged in conversations, both with folks inside and outside the department that are working in this space to, help refine what that approach will be. So stand by. I think we'll see a lot of really interesting capabilities coming out of us. So I'm really, really excited about how Swift will evolve.
We could easily do an hour just on this, but I do want to ask at least one follow-up question on Swift, which is just getting back to your point on all the input that you've gotten, that vendors are already controlling their software pipelines in a secure way.
Yeah.
The department's next question is always going to be, okay, prove it to us before you let you into our ecosystem. Is it your sense that there's enough of that convergence around industry standards that starts to get easier if the department just starts to accept those standards? Is that going too far?
So that's the critical question, right? That's the one I'm wrestling with now. So I'm seeing so we need to set a baseline so that we understand where folks are and we can communicate effectively, right? So if we look at the first steps that NIST took with the Secure Software Development Framework, SSDF, that's another one that's brought up a lot. So I think SSDF, NIST 800-218, that really sets a great framework. It's not really great for using as a measuring stick on how far people are along in that process, right? It's very difficult to implement test cases against the SSDF recommendations to say, yep, you're fully there or not there. There's a lot of room for interpretation. So I think where the industry, what we're seeing from the RFI responses is folks coming in and saying, yep, we're using SSDF as a broad framework. We are then supplementing that with these other standards and industry best practices, whether that's SLSA or OWASP or some of these other frameworks that folks are implementing. And then the setup process, and also defining the setup processes they're implementing, whether that's trying to get after full compositional analysis of their software package, right? So that's kind of the starting point. I have a piece of software that can be composed of thousands of items of open source software libraries, various frameworks, etc. Um, really trying to get down to the real details of what's in a software package, and then making sure that the pipeline controls, the CI/CD pipelines that folks are using are protected appropriately. Because what we're seeing is the adversaries attacking those pipelines because they would love to inject malicious code or backdoors or phone home sorts of algorithms into software, and they're finding it, as we've gotten better at locking down our production systems, building that into the raw components at the beginning can be an open avenue of attack. And what we're trying to do is make sure we understand those attack avenues that are being actively exploited by our adversaries, and make sure we're communicating to industry, hey, here are the types of attack patterns and what you need to be doing to protect yourselves and to protect the software deliveries you're making to the department against these types of attack patterns. And I think what we're seeing, it will have to be a little more prescriptive in defining what some of those standards are in order for us to have a high level of comfort that the software we're receiving is trustworthy and has not embedded some of these exploits that our adversaries would love to put in the software.
Literally down to our last couple minutes here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to give us at least a little bit of an update on where the department is with CMMC. What's left to do before that really becomes reality across the department that vendors need to fit themselves into? And the second part of that is, what have you learned about what support needs to be made available, especially to small businesses, to make
Yep.
make that doable?
No, so this is another one, right? So, and applying on Swift. So, looking at that, how do we start to drive this culture of cyber across our defense industrial base? Of course, CMMC is focused on our partners and we need to make sure that they are able to protect and safeguard controlled unclassified information that we may be handing to them or that they may be developing on our behalf. So we know the adversaries, not only are they trying to attack the software pipelines, they're also trying to attack, steal intellectual property and get access to this controlled unclassified information. So, it has been a long time. So CMMC, really based on the NIST 800-171, hey, folks, here's what you need to be doing to achieve moderate security levels necessary to protect controlled unclassified information, basic cyber hygiene things. Those were published as a requirement in 2017. And so we have been on this journey for a long time. And I think your point on the small businesses, right? We expect that the large businesses can make those investments. They know how to do these things. They should be there. They should have been there. If they're not already, they should have been there a long time ago. But it can be burdensome on a small business that doesn't necessarily have the full understanding of and the ability to interpret what does something like a NIST 800-171 mean to me, and how do I go about implementing it, right? There can be a pretty steep learning curve. So we have worked, recognizing that challenge, we have worked with our counterparts in acquisition and sustainment, ANS, and specifically the Office of Small Business Programs, to implement what they are referring to as Project Spectrum and their Cloud Pilot program. So these are programs. The first one looking at training and guidance for small businesses on how do you implement it, and then looking at the Cloud Pilot program as, hey, we can provide secure environments that meet the majority of those CMMC requirements already. So if you acquire and configure these types of capabilities, you're there. We're also working and have now available programs from NSA's Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, so CCC, and from the DoD Cyber Crime Center, DC3. So they have various free programs that can assist small businesses in reaching their cybersecurity compliance goals and working everything from implementing initial controls to coordinating on the types of attacks and threats and appropriate response actions to see those threats. And I think we also had ongoing conversations with the JWCC cloud providers, for them to be able to develop and host platforms available and make those available for businesses looking to achieve CMMC compliance. And so we have great response with those vendors. There are capabilities there that folks can build off of these secure environments and inherit a lot of the controls. I was just talking to, of course, CMMC is my friend and colleague Stacy Bosjanic, and I was just talking to her last night as looking at some of the talking points, and she told me that recently they were talking to a company, a small business, 5-person company. They found someone to help them get into the CMMC compliance. They went from zero understanding to fully compliant, perfect score for CMMC in 2 months, and it cost them roughly about $13,000. And so what we're seeing is now, while there was a significant barrier, I think the effort that we've done here within the CIO with our counterparts at DC3 and NSA, and certainly the work that ANS has put into this, we've resolved a lot of those challenges people were seeing on the difficulty of the CMMC journey.
Well, this is easily one we could also do an hour on, but we don't have another hour. We do have to say goodbye. I really want to thank Rob Vietmeyer, DoD's Chief Software Officer, for all the time. Rob, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thanks for this opportunity. I think it's really essential as we are at this point of transformation and rapid transformation, as we're looking at, hey, we can understand what the modern environment is demanding of us from a technology delivery, from a cybersecurity perspective. We have the components in place, at least at some level now, and this conversation we're having with our partners in government and industry, and how do we move this pace faster and meeting the deadlines and goals that the SecDef has laid out for us, and the speed. It is a really interesting time, and I really appreciate the feedback and the guidance that our industry partners have been giving us to help us along this journey, as we mentioned a couple times today. So really excited about the next steps we're taking here, and I'm sure I'll be back to talk about those as some of these piece parts fall into place here in the next few weeks and months.
Excited to talk to you again about all this. I really appreciate it. And again, that's Rob Vietmeyer, DoD's Chief Software Officer. I'm Deputy Editor Jared Serbu. You're watching Federal News Network. Now we'll send you back to the studio for more on the Cloud Exchange.